people perish. Who in hell would have thought that in a moment of time they would be in hell? Just like that man that you preached about. Just like that, life was over in what we call life. But in the same instance, he was in a place called hell, tormented, until the day that God would call him to the white throne judgment, and then would be cast into the lake of fire. Something happened to me back in, God called me to preach back in 1973, right after I got saved. And when I started preaching, I thought my ministry would be amongst our people, our Cherokee people. Never would have thought that I would go throughout the world in the United States. There's only 2 states in the United States that I haven't preached in. All the others I've had the opportunity to preach there. But little would I've thought that God would bring me to the point where I had to realize that God's calling was real on my life. My first away trip after I started preaching, I got a call from Denver, Colorado. Now here's a Mays County boy, Rob, that never been out of Chimney Rock Holler. Not nowhere to be talked about. But God called me to Denver, Colorado back in those years. Not knowing where it was, not knowing which way to go. And back then, she stayed at home and took care of our kids while they went to school. And I had to go by myself. That made it even more scarier. But I left that day and I drove to Kansas, the state of Kansas. Then I took Interstate 70. Went all the way to Denver, Colorado. And man, that's the first time I'd ever seen buildings reaching for the sky. Didn't know where I was at. Had an address of where that church was. And I kept on asking God. I said, God, please tell me where it is, what I need to. And man, there were so many exits. I didn't know where to turn, what I was going to do. And God spoke to my heart, nudged me and said, right here at a certain exit. And I veered off and I came off into a street. And it was the Colfax Street. Any one of you all ever been to in Denver, Colorado? Knows that Colfax Street is the Sodom and Gomorrah. It runs from all the way from the other end of town all the way to the airport. There's nothing but sinful. Every derelict that you ever dreamed of walks there. And I stopped at a convenience store and I asked that man, I said, sir, I need some help. He said, what can I do for you? I said, got an address. I've never been here, don't know where I'm at. I said, can you show me or tell me how far I am from this place? And he looked at it and he said, man, he said, you're just a block away from it. God knows how to put you in the right place. And I got there and I preached that night at that church, and the next day at 5 o'clock, they had told me at noon that I'd be preaching at a mission place at 5 o'clock and then at church at 7. So I went to that mission church. That mission church was, humongous. Right on Colfax Street. And it housed about 300 or 400 people, and they filled that place with street people. And I want you to know there was chaos in there from the very beginning. And then they turned it over to me to preach. The moment I started preaching, they started cursing. They started every conceivable kind of words I hadn't even heard was hurled against me. And I want you to know these were people that were just looking. A friend of mine, it just seemed like I was in a room full of demons. Jeering at me from every corner. And about middle ways, there was 3 men that approached me that night. And they cursed me out in front of everybody, about 300 people. They cursed and said everything. They said, we don't want you here. Go home, back where you belong. Said, you're not even our kind. You go home. They said everything about me. So called me names. And then when they got through, they started walking away. One man said that if I came back the next night, they would make sure that I wouldn't leave there alive. Now you talk about being scared. Beloved, I'm 6'2" or 6'2 and a half, and I was scared out of my wits. I mean, I was like a little boy in a dark forest with every demon coming at me. And I tell you, beloved, I was so frightened. And those men cursed me and called me everything, and then they walked away, and that one man turned back, and he said, I want to tell you what I think about you, he said. And he coughed up this great big old spittle out of his chest and looked in my face, and he spit in my face.
Oh.
I've never been spit on in my life. And I want you to know that friend of mine, beloved, I wish that place could have went to hell that night. And I want you to know that it didn't matter to me. It so scared me for I wanted to run out of there. And somehow or another I finished that night. And I went back to my room, and they had me standing in the basement of a church, and dark. It seemed like a dungeon. I was so scared. Every demon in hell was coming at me. And I called my wife about 1 o'clock, and I said, Mom, I said, get as many as you can to pray for me. She scared her. She thought I was sick, and I said, no. I said, I'm facing something I've never faced in my life. Mama, I'm scared. I said, I want to go home. And we got to praying, and then she called everybody, and I got back on my bed, and I said, Lord, I want to go home. I said, I wish you'd send a snowstorm through here, earthquake, I don't care what it is. He said, I'd like to go home. And then he said this, Rob, he said, you really like it when they amen you back home, don't you?
Come on.
He said, everybody thinks you're something. They pat you on the shoulder. Boy, you're a big man back home, ain't you? He said, I'll let you go home. He said, but don't you ever call yourself a preacher. If you go home tonight, I'll let you go. Wow. I was so scared. I told the Lord, I said, Lord, you go back with me, I'll go back. And God said, I'm always with you. He said, don't you know these people that you're preaching to? He said, I died for them too.
Amen. Yes.
Those are the ones I went to the cross for. Those you think they're so dirty and filthy. They don't deserve heaven. They're the ones I died for. God broke my heart in that room that night.
Yes. Amen.
If I was ever sure of being called to preach, I knew that night.
Yes.
Whether I died or what,
Right.
I had to stay. And I wasn't the big man that you would think I am. I preached with a broken heart that next night, but something happened that next night I'll never forget. The same people cursing started as soon as I started speaking. They was sitting in the windowsill, and one guy said, I'm a warlock, I can kill you anytime I want to, he told me. And man, just saying every conceivable kind of thing you can say to a human person. They hollered, screamed at me, and I just kept on preaching. Finally got through, and I gave the invitation, and there's a stirring way back there, and I seen this big man. I ain't never seen a black man big as he was. He's about 6'6" and weighed 300 and something pounds, looked like, and a mountain of a man as he moved those people out of the way. And I noticed that he had his hand down, and I looked down, he had a little bitty boy with him. You know, all the way they started coming. He had to push people out of the way as he came down the aisle. And right before he got to me, he fell on his knees. And he's crying. He said, the kid, this man that you talking about, he said, can he save me? He told me. And I said, yes, sir, he sure can. I got down there on my knees. I was beloved, and people still jeering, cursing, and I led him to the Lord. And When we got up, he said something that I'll never forget. I believe that was God sent. He said, "Preacher," he said, "I want you to know something." He said, "Don't you be scared no more." He said, "I'm going to be standing right here behind you every night that you're here."
Amen.
He said, "You preach with everything you
Oh,
got,
my.
because they're just like me." He said
Amen.
they need Jesus too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
A friend of mine, beloved, I came out from Denver, Colorado, a different man than I went in.
Hey.
If I was ever sure that I was called to preach, I knew that night.
Yeah.
That's called to preach. It's never been the same since then. God can do that with anybody. But I want you to know,
Yeah.
no matter where for the last 51 years that I've preached, I've never turned back any place. I don't care if it's an outhouse or
Yeah.
back house or White House or whatever. I've always carried the gospel.
Amen.
It's simply because of that experience that God had to show me and convince me that he had put his hand on me.
Amen.
Preach. That's my story.